You wake up every morning and slip into a costume that was never yours to begin with. You check your phone, scroll through the same feeds, consume the same thoughts that millions of others are consuming at this exact moment, and you call this living. But what if I told you that what you're experiencing isn't life at all, but merely the mechanical reproduction of scripts written by others, scripts that have been handed down through generations of people who were just as unconscious as you are now? Nietzsche saw this clearly over a century ago when he spoke of the herd mentality, the way human beings cluster together in comfortable mediocrity, following the same patterns, believing the same beliefs, never questioning whether any of it actually serves their authentic self. You think you're making choices, but are you really? Or are you simply following the algorithm of social conditioning that was programmed into you before you could even speak? Look at your daily routine. Notice how much of it is driven not by your genuine desires or your authentic will, but by what you think you should do, what others expect of you, what society has taught you is normal or successful or good. You go to work not because it fulfills your deepest purpose, but because that's what responsible adults do. You maintain relationships not because they nourish your soul, but because isolation is seen as failure. You buy things not because you truly need them, but because consumption has become the primary way we're taught to express our identity. Every morning, you perform the same ritual of self-betrayal. You put on clothes that reflect not your authentic taste, but what's deemed appropriate for your social position. You eat breakfast foods that advertising has convinced you are healthy or normal, not what your body actually craves. You drive the same route to the same job where you perform the same tasks that drain your life force, all while telling yourself, this is what adults do. This is responsibility. This is how life works. But whose life? Certainly not yours. You're living a borrowed existence, a photocopy of a photocopy, each generation becoming fainter, more removed from any original authentic human experience. This is what Nietzsche meant when he declared that God is dead and we have killed him. He wasn't just making a statement about religion. He was pointing to the death of any transcendent meaning, any higher purpose that could guide our lives beyond the shallow scripts of social conformity. When we killed God, we didn't replace him with authentic individual will. We replaced him with the tyranny of public opinion, with the crushing weight of what everyone else thinks we should be doing with our lives. But here's what's even more insidious about this death of meaning. We didn't just lose our connection to the divine. We lost our connection to ourselves. In place of authentic spiritual seeking, we got consumer spirituality, bite-sized wisdom served up in social media posts and self-help books that promise transformation without the actual work of transformation. We got meditation apps instead of genuine contemplative practice, vision boards instead of real vision, positive thinking instead of honest self-examination. The modern world has created the perfect storm for script following. We're bombarded with so much information, so many opinions, so many voices telling us who we should be and what we should want, that we've lost the ability to hear our own inner voice. We mistake the loudest external voice for wisdom, the most popular opinion for truth, the most socially acceptable path for the right path. We've become echo chambers of collective unconsciousness, endlessly repeating the same patterns, the same mistakes, the same empty pursuits that our parents and their parents pursued before us. But here's the thing that Nietzsche understood, and that Carl Jung later expanded upon in his work on individuation. Beneath all these scripts, beneath all this unconscious following of predetermined patterns, there exists an authentic self that is dying to break free. Jung called this the process of individuation, the painful but necessary journey of separating your true nature from the collective unconscious, from the shared delusions and assumptions that keep humanity trapped in cycles of repetition. Think about it. When was the last time you made a decision based purely on your own inner knowing, without considering what others would think, without weighing the social consequences, without calculating how it would affect your image or your status or your security? When was the last time you spoke your truth, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it challenged the comfortable assumptions of those around you? When was the last time you chose difficulty over comfort, growth over safety, authenticity over acceptance? Most people can't answer these questions because they've been following scripts for so long that they've forgotten what their authentic voice even sounds like. They've become so good at anticipating what others want to hear, so skilled at reading social cues and adjusting their behavior accordingly, that they've lost touch with their own genuine responses. They know how to be likable, how to be successful, how to be normal, but they have no idea how to be themselves. You see, the reason you feel empty, the reason you feel like something is missing even when you're checking all the boxes that society tells you should make you happy, is because you're not living your life. You're living someone else's idea of what your life should be. You're following scripts written by people who were themselves following scripts, an endless chain of unconscious reproduction that stretches back through generations of human beings who never once stopped to ask themselves, what do I actually want? What is my authentic will? What would I do if I weren't afraid of what others might think? This fear of others' judgment is perhaps the most powerful force keeping you trapped in script following. You've been conditioned from childhood to believe that acceptance from others is more important than acceptance from yourself, that fitting in is more valuable than standing out, that being normal is safer than being authentic. But what you don't realize is that this safety is an illusion. The price you pay for social acceptance is the slow death of your authentic self, the gradual erosion of everything that makes you unique and vital and genuinely alive. Consider your relationships. How many of them are based on genuine compatibility and mutual understanding? And how many are based on playing roles that you think you should play? How often do you find yourself saying things you don't really mean, agreeing with opinions you don't really hold, participating in activities you don't really enjoy, all because you're following the script of what a good friend, partner, family member, or colleague should do? This is where Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch becomes relevant. Not as some fascist fantasy of superiority, but as the individual who has the courage to create their own values, to write their own script, to live according to their authentic will rather than the borrowed will of the masses. The Übermensch is not superhuman in the sense of having superhuman powers, but in the sense of having transcended the need for external validation, external scripts, external definitions of what it means to be successful or happy or good. The Übermensch has learned what most people never learn, that the opinions of others, especially the collective opinions of the herd, are largely worthless. They're based on the same unconscious conditioning, the same inherited assumptions, the same borrowed ideas that keep everyone trapped in cycles of meaningless repetition. When you base your life on these opinions, you're building your existence on quicksand, on the shifting sands of social fashion and collective delusion. Think about the people you admire most, the ones who seem to radiate genuine vitality and authenticity. What do they have in common? They've learned to trust their own inner compass rather than constantly looking around to see what everyone else is doing. They've developed what Nietzsche called amor fati, the love of fate, the ability to embrace their own path even when it doesn't conform to societal expectations. They've stopped trying to be who they think they should be and started being who they actually are. But this transformation, this movement from script following to authentic living, requires something that most people are unwilling to give. It requires the death of your false self. It requires you to let go of the image you've constructed of yourself, the image that was built to please others, to fit in, to be acceptable. It requires you to face what Jung called the shadow, all the parts of yourself that you've been taught to hide or deny, because they don't fit the script of who you're supposed to be. The shadow isn't just the obviously negative traits you don't want to acknowledge. It's also your authentic desires, your genuine reactions, your real opinions that you've learned to suppress because they might make others uncomfortable. It's your anger at being treated poorly, your resentment at having to pretend to care about things that bore you, your deep longing for something more meaningful than the endless cycle of work and consumption and social media validation that passes for modern life. Most people spend enormous amounts of energy trying to keep their shadow hidden, not just from others, but from themselves. They've been taught that certain thoughts, feelings, and desires are unacceptable, so they push them down into the unconscious where they continue to operate, influencing behavior in ways that the conscious mind doesn't understand. This creates a split personality, the conscious persona that tries to be good and acceptable and normal, and the unconscious shadow that contains all the authentic life force that's been denied and repressed. The problem with this split is that it makes genuine intimacy impossible. When you're constantly hiding parts of yourself, when you're always performing a role rather than being authentic, you can never truly connect with others. They're relating to your persona, not to your real self, which means you're always alone even when you're surrounded by people. You're always performing, always trying to maintain the image, always afraid that if people saw who you really are, they would reject you. But here's the paradox. The very thing you're afraid will cause rejection, your authentic self, is actually the only thing that can create genuine connection. People are drawn to authenticity like moths to flame because it's so rare in a world full of personas and performances. When you have the courage to be real, to show your shadow as well as your light, to admit your struggles and confusions and genuine desires, you give others permission to do the same. Here's what nobody tells you about following scripts. It's not just unfulfilling, it's actually dangerous to your psychological health. When you consistently ignore your authentic impulses, when you consistently choose what others expect over what you actually want, you create a split in your psyche. Part of you becomes increasingly resentful and depressed, while another part of you becomes increasingly rigid and controlling, trying to maintain the facade of the false self you've created. This is why so many people who seem to have everything together on the surface are actually falling apart underneath. They've become so good at following scripts, so good at performing the role they think they should play, that they've lost touch with their own inner reality. They don't know what they actually think or feel or want, because they've spent so long focusing on what they should think or feel or want. The depression epidemic, the anxiety epidemic, the addiction epidemic, the suicide epidemic, these are all symptoms of a culture that has lost touch with authentic living. When people can't access their genuine desires and impulses, when they're trapped in scripts that don't serve their authentic nature, their life force begins to die. They might look successful on the outside, they might check all the boxes that society says should make them happy, but inside they're withering away, slowly suffocating under the weight of a borrowed existence. This is what Nietzsche meant when he talked about nihilism, the sense that life has no meaning, no purpose, no point. But nihilism isn't an objective truth about reality. It's the inevitable result of living someone else's life instead of your own. When you follow scripts written by others, when you pursue goals that aren't genuinely yours, when you try to become someone you're not, of course life feels meaningless. You're not actually living. You're just going through the motions of a life that was never meant for you. But here's the beautiful thing about human consciousness. It's never too late to wake up. It's never too late to start questioning the scripts you've been following, to start examining whether your life actually reflects your authentic values and desires, or whether you've been sleepwalking through someone else's dream of what your life should be. The awakening process begins with awareness, with simply noticing the extent to which your life is governed by external expectations rather than internal guidance. Start paying attention to the difference between things you do because you want to do them and things you do because you feel you should do them. Notice how often you censor yourself, how often you suppress your genuine reactions, how often you choose what's safe and acceptable over what's true and authentic. The first step is simply becoming aware of the scripts. Start noticing when you're doing something because you feel you should, versus when you're doing something because you genuinely want to. Start paying attention to the voice in your head that's always worried about what others will think, the voice that's always trying to keep you safe and acceptable and normal. That voice isn't your authentic self speaking. It's the internalized voice of social conditioning, the collection of all the shoulds and shouldn'ts that have been programmed into you since childhood. This voice of social conditioning is incredibly sophisticated. It doesn't just tell you what to do, it tells you what to want. It convinces you that its desires are your desires, that its values are your values, that its definition of success and happiness and fulfillment should be your definition. It's like a parasite that has learned to mimic the host so perfectly that the host can't tell the difference between its own voice and the voice of the invader. The second step is learning to distinguish between your authentic desires and the desires that have been implanted in you by external forces. This is harder than it sounds because consumer culture is specifically designed to make you think that manufactured desires are authentic desires. You think you want that new car or that perfect relationship or that dream job, but do you really? Or do you want them because you've been told that having them will make you happy, successful, worthy of love? Real authentic desire has a different quality to it. It doesn't come from comparison with others, or from trying to fill a void or from trying to prove something. It comes from a deep sense of rightness, a feeling that this particular path or choice or way of being aligns with something fundamental in your nature. It's not desperate or grasping. It's more like a quiet certainty, a sense of coming home to yourself. Authentic desire also has a different relationship to outcome. When you're following scripts, you're usually attached to specific results, specific achievements, specific forms of external validation. But authentic desire is more interested in the process than the outcome, more focused on the journey than the destination. It's about expressing your true nature, not about getting somewhere or becoming someone different than who you are. The third step is developing the courage to act on your authentic insights, even when they contradict the scripts you've been following. This is where most people get stuck because acting authentically often means disappointing others, challenging their expectations, refusing to play the roles they want you to play. It means being willing to be misunderstood, to be criticized, to be seen as selfish or irresponsible or weird. This is perhaps the most difficult part of the journey because we're social creatures, evolved to need connection and belonging. The fear of ostracism, of being rejected by the tribe, is one of our most primal fears. It's literally a survival fear, because for most of human history, being rejected by the group meant death. But in the modern world, this fear has become maladaptive, keeping us trapped in situations and relationships and ways of being that slowly kill our authentic self. But here's what Nietzsche understood that most people don't. The opinion of the herd is worthless. The people who criticize you for breaking free from scripts are usually the people who are most trapped by scripts themselves. They attack your authenticity because it threatens their own comfortable mediocrity, because it forces them to confront the possibility that they too could be living differently if they had the courage to question their own assumptions. When you start living more authentically, you become a mirror for others, reflecting back their own unlived life, their own suppressed authenticity, their own abandoned dreams and desires. This makes them uncomfortable because it reminds them of what they've given up, what they've sacrificed on the altar of social acceptability. So they try to pull you back down, to convince you that what you're doing is dangerous or selfish or unrealistic. This doesn't mean you should be cruel or thoughtless in how you express your authenticity. It means you should stop letting the fear of others' disapproval be the primary factor in your decision-making. It means you should start asking yourself, what would I do if I weren't afraid? What would I choose if I didn't have to justify it to anyone else? What kind of life would I create if I trusted my own judgment more than I trusted the collective judgment of people who don't even know who they are themselves? The irony is that when you start living more authentically, when you start following your genuine impulses rather than external scripts, you don't become selfish or antisocial. You become more genuinely connected to others because you're no longer relating to them from a false position. You're no longer trying to get them to validate your persona or fill the void left by your abandoned authentic self. You can meet them as a real person rather than as a collection of roles and masks. This is what Jung meant when he talked about individuation not as a selfish process, but as a process that ultimately serves the collective. When you become more authentic, more conscious, more aligned with your genuine nature, you stop projecting your unconscious material onto others. You stop trying to make them responsible for your happiness or your sense of worth. You become someone who can offer genuine support and understanding because you're no longer desperately seeking it for yourself. When you're living authentically, you also become more creative, more innovative, more capable of contributing something unique to the world. Scripts, by definition, are repetitive. They produce the same results over and over again. But authenticity is inherently creative because it's about expressing your unique perspective, your individual way of seeing and being in the world. It's about adding something new to the human conversation rather than just repeating what's already been said. But the journey from script following to authentic living isn't easy, and it's not a one-time decision. It's an ongoing process of becoming more conscious, more honest with yourself, more willing to face the parts of your experience that don't fit the comfortable narratives you've been telling yourself. It requires what Nietzsche called eternal recurrence, the willingness to live your life in such a way that you could bear to live it over and over again, exactly as it is. This is the ultimate test of authenticity. If you had to live your current life infinite times, would you choose it? Not the life you're planning to live someday when you get your act together, but the life you're actually living right now. The relationships you're actually in, the work you're actually doing, the choices you're actually making day after day. If the answer is no, then you're following scripts rather than living authentically, and it's time to start making different choices. The eternal recurrence isn't meant to be a depressing thought, it's meant to be a liberating one. It's asking you, what would you change about your life if you knew you had to live it over and over again? What relationships would you end? What work would you stop doing? What places would you stop going? What activities would you stop participating in? What lies would you stop telling to yourself and to others? But also, what would you start doing? What dreams would you finally pursue? What truths would you finally speak? What authentic desires would you finally honor? What unique gifts would you finally share with the world? What genuine connections would you finally make? The beautiful thing about human consciousness is that every moment offers a new opportunity to choose authenticity over conformity, genuine desire over manufactured desire, your own path over the well-worn scripts that everyone else is following. You don't have to wait for permission or for the perfect moment or for someone else to show you how. You can start right now with the next decision you make by asking yourself, is this coming from my authentic self, or am I just following another script? This is your life, your one irreplaceable existence. It's not a dress rehearsal. It's not practice for some future real life. It's happening right now, moment by moment, choice by choice. Every time you choose the script over authenticity, every time you choose what others expect over what you genuinely want, every time you choose safety over truth, you're trading away a piece of your irreplaceable existence for the illusion of security and acceptance. But security and acceptance based on false premises are themselves false. They're castles built on sand, relationships built on lies, achievements that satisfy everyone except the person who achieved them. True security comes from knowing who you are and living in alignment with that truth, regardless of what others think. True acceptance comes from accepting yourself fully, shadow and light, so that you no longer need others to validate your worth. The world doesn't need another person following scripts. It needs you to wake up, to become conscious, to start living from your genuine nature, rather than from the collection of borrowed ideas and inherited assumptions that have been masquerading as your identity. It needs you to become who you actually are, not who you think you should be. The scripts are everywhere, embedded in every institution, every social interaction, every expectation about how life should unfold. But you are not a script. You are a unique expression of consciousness, a one-time experiment in human possibility, an irreplaceable perspective on reality. Your authentic self is not just different from everyone else's, it's necessary. The world needs what you have to offer, but only if you have the courage to offer it authentically, rather than filtering it through the scripts that everyone else is following. The time for sleepwalking is over. The time for following scripts written by people who don't know who they are is over. The time for living someone else's idea of what your life should be is over. It's time to wake up and start living. It's time to write your own script, create your own values, follow your own path. It's time to become the author of your own existence rather than just an actor in someone else's play. This is not just your opportunity, it's your responsibility. Not just to yourself, but to the world, to the future, to all the people who will benefit from your authentic contribution rather than your scripted performance. The world has enough copies, enough people following the same patterns, repeating the same mistakes, pursuing the same empty dreams. What it needs is originals, individuals who have the courage to be themselves, fully and unapologetically. Stop outsourcing your life to the opinions and expectations of others, and start creating it from the inside out, from your authentic will, from the deep knowing that exists beneath all the scripts and masks and comfortable lies you've been telling yourself. Your authentic self is not a luxury. It's not something you can pursue when you have time, when you're more secure, when the conditions are right. It's the only thing that matters, the only thing that can give your life genuine meaning and vitality. The choice is yours, and it's available to you right now, in this moment. Will you continue following scripts, or will you finally start living?